I believe we find ourselves in an extraordinary situation in the West today, trying desperately to do what the atheist philosopher Nietzsche argued cannot be done. To hold on to a high view of the equal and inherent dignity of every human being, while at the same time experiencing in our day-to-day lives a gradual eroding of a sense of togetherness and of trust in our institutions, in our politics, and in one another. Well, welcome back to the second half of this talk, Where Does Our Value Come From? In the first half, we began by asking what in a world of 8 billion other people makes your individual life or mine valuable? And we saw that while we as a society continue to ascribe to the belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, as expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that most people would be hard-pressed to explain why or on what rational basis they believe that, little recognizing that historically speaking, our moral instincts about human dignity didn't come from nowhere, but from the Bible, and specifically from the revolutionary idea that we've all been made in the image of God. This all leaves us with a big question. Can we retain our belief in the inherent dignity of every human being if, as a society, we continue to cut ourselves off from the very root that nurtured these beliefs in the first place? Interestingly, the atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche argued 150 so years ago that without belief in God, there is no basis for belief in human dignity and equality. He writes, "The masses blink and say, we are all equal. Man is but man. Before God, we are all equal. Before God, but now this God has died." Well, despite Nietzsche's warning that getting rid of God also means getting rid of any reason to believe in human equality and dignity, there have nonetheless been very sincere attempts by some thinkers to explain or justify the notion of human dignity in something other than God. And by far the most common approach is what's called a capacity approach to human dignity. So called because it's an approach that seeks to explain our value as human beings in terms of this or that ability or capacity. So for example, it's commonly argued that our value as human beings resides in our capacity for rational agency, i.e. our ability to make decisions on the basis of reasons. That makes us valuable. Or that it resides in our capacity for personhood, i.e. our ability to ascribe hopes, beliefs, or actions to ourselves. And while I agree that these capacities are incredible and valuable, the trouble with pointing to them as a ground for human dignity is that there will always be some human beings who do not have such capacities. For example, newly born babies, or those who are born with severe mental or cognitive impairments, such as those with severe Alzheimer's. And yet, it's the dignity of human beings like this that most of us intuitively want to protect. If we're only going to recognize the worth of human beings whose cognitive function rises to a certain level, rather than all human beings, it also raises the question of who decides. For example, evolutionary biologists James Watson and Francis Crick argued that we should wait 3 days after birth to decide whether to allow a baby to live because some genetic defects aren't detectable until after birth. The Princeton philosopher Peter Singer has argued that even a 3-year-old is a grey case because toddlers don't really have much cognitive functioning. As just these examples make clear, the major difficulty with any theory of human dignity that tries to locate it in terms of some cognitive capacity is that it will always exclude some human beings, and usually those human beings whose dignity we intuitively want to protect, not least because they cannot protect themselves. The other major problem with a theory of human dignity that attempts to locate our value in a particular capacity is that it's hard to see how this would not imply that those human beings with more of this capacity must possess a greater worth than those human beings with less of this capacity. And it's hard to see how this would not lead to an understanding of human equality, to borrow an Orwellian idea that all human beings are equal, but some human beings are more equal than others. Another common way in which theorists have attempted to explain the notion of human dignity without God has been by trying to explain it in terms of evolution. The argument here being that because we have naturally evolved as social creatures, this inherent sociability and valuing of other human beings is an adequate foundation for recognizing human dignity. But the obvious difficulty with this argument, as the psychologist Jonathan Haidt observes, is that the story of human evolution is not only the story of human beings being social with each other, it's also the story of human beings competing with each other, and often violently. For the majority of the human species, and for tens of thousands of years, the idea that humanity includes every human being on the face of the earth does not exist at all. The designation stops at the border of each tribe. In fact, evolutionary biologists tell us that among the list of universal human desires, which are rooted in human nature, in addition to sociability, are the desire for war, and in men, the desire for dominance, neither of which represent a promising foundation on which to establish human dignity, particularly the desire for dominance, which would seem rather to legitimize such things as slavery and sexual oppression, which are activities that clearly violate human dignity rather than promote it. No wonder the political philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who's not a Christian, writes, "Egalitarian universalism, from which sprang the ideas of freedom, human rights and democracy, is the direct heir to the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. To this day, there is no alternative to it. Everything else is just idle postmodern talk." I want to suggest that the revolutionary idea that we should love our neighbor, including the neighbor who is different to us, is a doctrine that belongs not to nature, nor to human nature, but to Jesus. Left to our natural selves, human beings do not move inexorably towards universal love and brotherhood. You may have noticed this, but repeatedly towards division and enmity, whether that's at the level of nation versus nation or simply at the level of neighbor versus neighbor. Even in the relatively peaceful and well-off United Kingdom, things are anything but united. Headlines warn we're seeing a more polarized, even tribalized culture. The same thing appears to be happening across most post-Christian Western nations. Culture warring, identity politics, people moving towards more extreme sides of right and left, and each side increasingly viewing the other side not just as wrong, but as evil, illegitimate, non-persons. And so I believe we find ourselves in an extraordinary situation in the West today, trying desperately to do what the atheist philosopher Nietzsche argued cannot be done. To hold on to a high view of the equal and inherent dignity of every human being, while at the same time experiencing in our day-to-day lives a gradual eroding of a sense of togetherness and of trust in our institutions, in our politics, and in one another. And I cannot help but wonder whether the reason for our increasing distrust and dismissal and othering of each other is that even though we say we believe in the inherent worth of all human beings, we no longer know why we believe it, and as a result, we no longer truly believe it deep down. According to the Bible, the tragedy of the human condition is that, like the Stradivarius violin found by the side of the road, we do possess a tremendous value and worth simply by virtue of who we are and where we came from, but we no longer feel our value because we've lost sense of who we are and where we came from. And so we end up trying to create or manufacture our value, as well as judging the value of others in external things like our academic results or job title or bank account or postcode or social connections or physical beauty or physical health, when in reality all these things will one day pass away, but there is something of far greater worth that will never pass away: your soul. Jesus Christ famously said, "What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world yet lose his soul?" What is it that makes your individual life valuable in a world of 8 billion people? According to Christianity, that which truly makes you valuable is not something that can be seen on the outside. It's your soul. For your soul is the deepest part of your inner self, the part that makes you uniquely you. And just as a precious Stradivarius violin bears in its handiwork the image of a master craftsman, so too your soul bears the image of the master craftsman, God himself. And however insignificant you may sometimes feel, you are not insignificant to your Maker, for he sees each and every one of us as completely unique and irreplaceable, one of a kind, not a mistake, nor an accident, nor a failure, but here on purpose, fearfully and wonderfully made in his image, and therefore not an it, but an I, not a product, but a person, not a machine, but a man, a human. A being who's not only a physical being, but also a spiritual being, fashioned for a beautiful future in God's beautiful universe. And therefore, infinitely valuable because infinitely valued by God himself, the ultimate judge of value. And infinitely valuable because we are created in the image of God himself, the ultimate standard of value. And so too is our neighbor and even our enemy. Which is why, according to Jesus, we are called to love both, for we all need saving, and in God's eyes, we are all worth saving. For our value as human beings is more than a natural dignity. As G.K. Chesterton puts it, every man is the bearer of the royal image. He or she is stamped with the seal of the divine King. Human rights, which are the explication, the unfolding of that intrinsic human dignity, are not so much natural rights as they are supernatural rights. Now, recently my wife and I watched the movie Instant Family, starring Mark Wahlberg. It's based on the true story of a couple that decides to adopt 3 siblings, and whilst the younger 2 children find it easier to accept their new parents, the teenage girl Lizzie struggles to accept being a part of their family. She cannot let go of the idea of returning to her birth mother, even though her birth mother has abandoned her time and time again. And at the end of the movie, the birth mother has once more let her down, and the girl has lashed out at her adoptive parents. In this one scene, she runs away from them and hides, but they chase after her, and they find her behind a fence crying. And she tells them to go away and leave her alone, but they say they can't do that because they love her. And she says, "No, you don't. You don't even know me." But then they show her just how much they do know her by describing all the little things about her that a lot of people wouldn't notice, but they do notice because they really do see her. And it's almost as if she just can't believe that they would really love her, but they really do. And they're like, "Lizzie, we really do love you. We love you. We love you." And Lizzie says, "Stop saying that. Stop saying that." And you can see in this young woman the anguish that she's experiencing as she finds it so hard to accept the love of these people that she's done nothing to deserve, but which they can't help but have for her because they see in her something that she can't see in herself, that she's incredibly precious and worth fighting for. It's like a picture of God's love for us in Jesus. Christianity says it's when we lose connection with the love of God in our lives that our souls get sick. And so we end up losing connection with what's really valuable in ourselves and in others. And that this is the root cause of why we live in a hurting world where people tend to objectify rather than to dignify, to denigrate rather than celebrate, to compete rather than to cooperate, to pull others down rather than lift them up, and to envy and resent rather than love and respect. That's the bad news. But the good news of Christianity is that there is a cure for this soul sickness, and that it is to be found in God's Son, Jesus, because in Jesus, we're enabled to see that it's not what we do that makes us or others valuable. It's who we are based on whose we are, God's magnificent and beloved creation. In fact, the Bible tells us that God values us so much that even while we were still in rebellion against God, Jesus died for us, and that on the cross, he willingly bore in his body the crushing consequence of all that deep sickness in our souls that causes us to devalue ourselves as well as to devalue others and to devalue God, so that even when we were saying to God, "I don't want you, I don't want you, I don't want you," God was saying back to us through Jesus Christ, "I love you, I love you, I love you." Because at the end of the day, God wants us to see ourselves and each other as living masterpieces of the author and creator of life, bearing in our very souls his likeness, which means that we find our ultimate fulfillment as human beings in alignment with the purpose for which he made us, which is simply this: to love and to be loved in loving relationship with the one who made us and loves us all. Because in God's eyes, this is the real music that our souls were created to play.
Hey guys, how are you doing? My name's Nathaniel and I'm part of the Oka team. And I just wanted to say a big thank you for watching this film we made. At Oka, we really love to speak about the big questions of our time and to show how the Christian faith provides credible and valuable answers. If you've enjoyed this film, check out the other stuff on our channel, and also please consider subscribing and following us. It really helps to make more films like this. We also want to hear from you, so if you have any ideas for new content, please put them in the comments below or get in touch with us directly. Thanks goes out to all the speakers, donors, and film team, of which I'm a part of. And actually, fun fact, it takes around 60 hours to make all of these films. And that's because we want to make sure the content is incredibly well researched, it looks and it flows beautifully, and ultimately, that it's actually useful to you. So this means a lot of research, listening to our audience, and filmmaking. Our incredible staff at Oka who make these films are funded by donations. So if you want to partner with us with our work, please also consider donating, which is really easy on our website. See you next time.